Now let's get into ideation, the initial step to start of something new. Brainstorming your ideas is the first step before you start anything. It's important to ideate either by scribbling or writing down your ideas without constraints, where you're not worried about composition except focusing on storytelling or building your world. Here's an example of how I took my sketch to the final. And I know it's not much, but as long as you understand your sketch, it doesn't matter. These don't see the light of day when it comes to production. They're for your personal use only. It's a stage where you sketch out rough ideas for a story. You have free range to explore at this stage. While exploring, you've got to think about the plot. No matter how you decide to tell your story, whether in the form of a video game, like Nintendo's Duck Hunt, or a board game, like Snakes and Ladders, everything has a story. The plot serves as the backbone of the narrative. It encompasses the sequence of events that drive the story forward, whether it's going to go on a quest to save a princess in the highest tower being guarded by a dragon, or a quest where the plot takes us through our character's personal journey of self discovery. The plot provides the framework for the unfolding narrative. All it needs is a beginning, middle, and end. The beginning being the introduction of the plot. Who are we introducing? It's important to establish the baseline. We'll take the example of Little Red Riding Hood for the purpose of explaining how to ideate. Right now, I have Little Red Riding Hood as a circle. Little Red Riding Hood is an old fairy tale where the story is already established. In the beginning of the story, Little Red is sent on an errand where her mother sends her through the woods with food for her ill grandmother, warning her not to stray from the path or talk to strangers. And this gives us enough information about the character, who she is, and her quest. After we have the introduction, we need a middle to the story. To make your plot more interesting, there needs to be some kind of conflict. Conflict is the driving force that propels narratives forward. It can take the form of external challenges, internal struggles, or the clash of opposition. Conflict is visually dynamic, often manifesting in action sequence, confrontations, and visual metaphors that vividly portray the obstacles character must overcome. In the case of Little Red Riding, it starts from when she meets the big bad wolf. And in this case, I have the wolf as a triangle. When she first meets the wolf in the forest and naively tells him where she's going, she points out her grandmother's house. After which, the wolf then arrives at the grandmother's house and first swallows her grandmother and disguises himself in her clothes and bed whilst waiting for Little Red. And when Little Red confronts the grandmother, she notices a difference in the grandmother's features, and the wolf then jumps out to grab her. This is a conflict in the middle of Red's story. After which, we'd need an end to the story, which is resolution. The resolution brings closure to the story. It's important when conflicts are resolved, characters undergo growth, and themes find fulfillment. But that isn't always the case. Sometimes you can leave stories open-ended, but it has to be intentional. You can't just not have a deliberate end and wing it and say, oh, it's up to the audience to interpret it. But in the case of Red Riding, we do have a resolution. It occurs when a passing huntsman comes to the rescue. In this case, he is Rectangle. Well, once he hears a scream coming from the grandmother's house, then he enters the cottage and sees the wolf and cuts him open before the wolf could grab her and rescuing the grandmother from the belly. And at the end, Little Red Riding and her grandmother are safe and sound. You see, the plot doesn't have to be so complicated. It can be as simple as the example of the story that I just narrated, or even telling a story of a kid struggling to open a box of chocolate. Or maybe you could make it complicated, like the Star Wars franchise. And if you have trouble coming up with an idea of your own, you can adapt stories by authors to design your world and concepts. Music, too, can be a good option. So now that we have the plot, what's next? It's the setting. The setting is not merely a backdrop, it's an integral part of the storytelling process. It's used to define world's atmosphere and emotional tone of the story. It doesn't matter where you want to set your story as long as it's in harmony with the plot. Settings inform a lot of visual cues to the audience about a character's personality or even evoke a deeper narrative that your audience is encouraged to explore. When building a scene, you have to think about factors like weather, the location, if it's a populated space or bed, the time of the day when the action takes place. Props and assets too come into play when you're thinking about the space. And in this case of Little Red Riding, the setting is already established, being the woods somewhere in Northern Europe. And every detail, from her house to the grandmother's house, is explained. So it's up to you if you want to do the legwork of building a whole new story on your own, or taking an established story, how I'm going to, and make illustrations off of it. Now that we have our ideas somewhat established, let's get into composition. And before we can get into how composition is used in a keyframe, let's first look at the fundamentals of what it takes to make a successful composition. For a good composition, you've got to have a focal point, depth, and variety in proportions. Without a good composition, color and value falls apart. And before you start making your composition, you've also got to think of the story behind it, your intention behind the piece. And to do that, we're going to learn about how to create focal point, depth, and harmony. Let's first start with focal points. Focal point is the main area of interest that catches the viewer's attention. It can be created through a combination of value, color, size, and shapes. Just like in this painting by Frank Johnson. Ways that you can create a focal point is using leading lines. Lines that can be used to guide the viewer's eyes to a specific subject or detail. They can be extremely distinct or extremely subtle. In some shots, you may not even notice that they're there, but they still guide your eye. And the ways you can use leading lines to direct focus towards a specific place is using the compound or S-curve. It can be used to guide the viewer's eye towards a key element or to create a sense of depth and dynamism in the composition. Here's an example of a painting by William Wendt, where he intercepts the S-curve with a horizontal line, that is the tree in this case, adding interest to the composition. When using this composition, you can place the special point of interest near the converging end of the main lines or well placed on the latter. Next, we have radiating lines. Lines that radiate or converge, representing a direct simple method and calling attention to the main area of interest. Tintoretto, converging or radiating lines to pull focus in the center of the piece. Diagonal line too can be used as a leading line. It is used to create a sense of movement and energy in a painting. Just like in this painting by Theodore Jericho, with the lines of the movement of the body of the people, the sailboat, the rope, is leading to the man waving a piece of red and white cloth on the top right. Rule of thirds is another way that you can use for a composition. It is a process of dividing an image into thirds using a grid of 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines and placing the subject of your photo at the intersection of those lines. The blue square suggests intersections where you could place your subject or focal point. When you position the most important element of your image at these intersections, you produce an image pleasing to the eyes. It is also suggested that any horizon is placed on either the top horizontal line or bottom horizontal line. Here is an example of a photograph I took at Wilmington Beach, and you'll notice how the rule of thirds is applied.